My name is Keira Oshiro. I'm a lecturer at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, where I teach courses like user experience design or data analysis or programming. And then I'm also a PhD student there, so I do research on accessibility and technology. And today I'd like to talk about my research on audio engineering by deaf and hard of hearing individuals. So before diving into the topic, I want to briefly share some background informations. I focus on people who are deaf and hard of hearing, often abbreviated as DHH. By convention in my research field, there are three common identifications. The term hard of hearing usually refers to a lighter degree of hearing loss, whereas deaf with lowercase d refers to more severe hearing loss. And the term deaf with capital D refers to a cultural identity. They often speak sign language as their native language. And today's talk covers deaf with lowercase d and hard of hearing individuals, so DHH with lowercase d. But I also understand and respect that some people feel uncomfortable with this lowercase d, uppercase d differentiations, and personal identification varies, and it's personal identification, so there's no definitive definition. With that in mind, please allow me to follow the convention common in my research field for today's talk. Okay, then talk about audio engineering. Audio engineering involves recording, manipulating, and reproducing sound for music, podcast, TV, radio, whatever. The typical workflow is recording is to capture the instrument's speech, etc. And then you import the audio tracks into your computer and do editing. People use software called digital audio workstations, I call it DAW, to perform audio engineering tasks. In editing, you try to make multiple audio tracks sound good as a whole. And then the final goal is to produce the best sounding artistic product. So it's not just a procedure, but rather more creative and artistic work. Like two engineers can produce very different results from the exact same tracks. This page shows the screenshot of a DAW. There are a bunch of rows. Each row shows one audio track and its waveform, which is a visual representation of sound. For example, in podcasting, one row can be the audio track for an interviewer, and another row for an interviewee, another row for background music, and so on. And then audio engineers do tasks like balancing track volumes, timings, stereo placement, equalization, inserting sound effect, and so on. Okay, let's turn to the main topic, how DHH individuals do audio engineering. To explore this, I conducted interviews with 12 DHH audio engineers, 8 working in music, and 4 in podcasting. And I want to share some of the key findings. Many of my participants described the persistent insecurities due to their hearing. As one participant said, my ears can be a little deceptive. Also, it took extra time and effort for them to conduct audio engineering. Another participant who became deaf during their career said, if I didn't have the hearing loss, it would have taken half the time at least because I could trust what I was hearing. In addition, some participants lack an innate understanding of certain sound concepts. For example, a participant born with a single-sided deafness said, I can't ever really experience it, like stereo sound, the same way that the people with 2 ears can. So what's their workaround? One of the main workarounds is a visual editing. To better perceive sound, they leverage visuals within a DAW. For instance, take a look at this waveform snapshot on the left. The top one is someone laughing, and you can tell that visually without listening because of this fishbone shape. And then the bottom one, you can visually tell there is a plosive sound, like what sound, because you see that big spike at the start In editing, you can trim it down so it doesn't blast your listeners. On the right, there's a stereo field view, a half circle with a lot of dots inside. So you can see how sound spreads left and right. And these are just a few examples, but these visuals give deaf and hard of hearing audio engineers more confident about what's going on with the sound and help them save their hearing energy since they tend to get tired easily when listening. Of course, visuals can only take you so far. As one participant said, I can depend on my eyes and the graphic readouts only so much. And another participant said, you do end up with complicated guessing game. So you can't see every nuance of sound. At the last result, participants turn to their hearing friends. They'll ask peers to give feedbacks to ensure the quality of work. Pretty much every audio engineer does this, but DHH audio engineers rely more on it. That said, asking for help isn't always easy. You have to learn how to be open and better at asking for help. And it can feel uncomfortable to keep asking for help too often, too much. You might need someone who understands audio engineering better to get higher quality feedback. Or plus, sometimes you want to be independent as a creator without being influenced by others too much. So regarding the use of technology, it turns out that DHH audio engineers use almost the same technology as hearing audio engineers, like DAWs and plugins. One exception is the hearing device, like hearing aids or cochlear implants, which can introduce its own set of frustrations. For example, about hearing aids, since most hearing aids are designed and adjusted for speech rather than music that contains a broader range of sound, they are often simply not good for music or audio engineering purposes. And finding an audiologist who is comfortable adjusting the setting for musical work is another challenge because it requires the right equipment in the lab and also expertise. Another thing is how they learn and grow as an audio engineer. Based on the research so far, I didn't notice a difference between the music and the podcast engineers. All 8 participants in music came through formal education, such as degrees in music technology, whereas the 4 podcasters learned audio engineering and podcasting by themselves through trial and error. They've often developed their own ways of doing audio engineering, sometimes not optimal, yet somehow works for them. And they felt that it's too much hassle to try out new tools or workflows, as they spend so many hours of learning and trial and error, and that might limit the opportunities for them to expand their skills. So that's pretty much where my research stands right now, basically to understand the current state of accessibility. And one of my future research direction is to think about how we can use AI for this. For example, sound design task in podcasting. Like imagine you are making a drama podcast and you want to insert a footstep sound. It seems simple, but actually you've got to think about a lot of factors like sneakers or heels, wood floor or tile, or walking and running. Like each of these details totally change the appropriate choice of sound. And those subtle cues can be tough to catch for DHH individuals sometimes. So what if we can develop an AI tool that can describe those subtle nuances of the sound and help them select and insert the sound appropriate for the scenes? I'm thinking about that kind of things. Okay, and this is my last slide. Before I go, I'd love to share one last thing. Christian Sankin, she's a deaf artist, has an amazing show at the Whitney Museum right now. So if you are around this area, you definitely want to check this out. Thank you very much.
in audio engineering, you need to use a lot of plugins generally, right? And these can be extremely helpful for the types of use cases you're describing. So, for example, for clicks and pops, just extraneous bad sounds, you could have something that automates those things away. But if you're doing podcast or dialogue editing, it becomes very difficult, right? And so I was curious, so I just looked this up. Since I haven't done audio engineering in some years, I wasn't sure. There's something called Audio Shake, which creates clean, time-stamped lyric transcriptions with high accuracy and syncs and aligns the transcript with the audio, right? And so for some of your use cases, that would be incredibly invaluable because otherwise you wouldn't be able to edit the dialogue naturally, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I personally have never used that, and I don't remember my participant mentioned that specific plugin. And more interestingly, people in podcasting field, I think because of the nature of the medium, like emerging a new kind of technology, it's like a kind of the YouTube thing, like you make your own YouTube like contents, like as an individual amateur creator, like many podcasting people do that kind of things, like without formal education. So for them, finding the right technologies, finding how to use it, learning how to use those technologies also another big challenge. Like they don't know how to use it. There are big gap between like technology is there or maybe almost there, but you just don't have a chance to use it, or you don't have you don't feel super comfortable trying out those things, but rather than stick to the old, like some technology for like some ways that are not super optimal for them. Like some people even don't use like automation of noise reduction, which is to some extent very basic tool, but people just prefer to find the noise just by themselves, exploring all the recordings and trying to find these tiny things and just delete them, those kind of things by hands. And some people do that. So yeah, there are technologies there, but how to use those technologies, and there are other complicated things. But yes, going back to that plugin, I think it's very nice and I'd love to use that. Thank you.